In a fishing village on the Okinawa coast, there is a woman who is 73 years old and has never owned a moisturizer. Her skin, by the standards of any dermatologist who has not met her, should not look the way it does. And yet it does. That contradiction is not an accident. It is the result of something practiced daily for generations, passed from mother to daughter, not as a beauty routine, but as ordinary life. And that distinction, ordinary versus routine, is the whole story. This channel exists because there is a version of Japan being sold to you, and then there is Japan. The version being sold is rice water in a glass bottle with a minimalist label, priced at $42 at every major retailer in America. It was formulated in a laboratory in New Jersey, approved by a panel funded by the same industry it was supposed to regulate, and it has almost nothing to do with what women in Okinawa, Kyoto, or the mountain communities of Nagano actually do. The women doing the thing that works are not selling it. They are using it. That is why you have not heard about it from anyone trying to take your money. The practices described on this channel come from the daily lives of women in Okinawa Prefecture, the traditional districts of Kyoto, and the rural communities of Nagano, places where these methods have never been replaced by anything modern, because nothing modern has proven worth the trade. Before we go any further, let's place you in the right frame. You are not 22. The women watching this are not looking for their first cleanser. They have read the labels, spent the money, and noticed that the gap between the promise and the result has stayed about the same for 40 years. They are not cynical, they are experienced. And experience in this context is a qualification, not a liability. The women in these Japanese communities would understand that immediately, because in their world, a woman who has lived longer is presumed to know more, not less. That presumption used to exist here too. Someone decided it was no longer useful. We will get to who and when. The first thing to understand about Japanese skincare, the real kind, is that it is not topical. That sentence is going to sound strange in a video about skin, but stay with it. When a 70-year-old woman in rural Nagano has skin that baffles her physician, the explanation is almost never the thing she puts on her face. It is the aggregate of what she has ingested, how she has moved, what she has not introduced into her body, and a thermal practice so old it predates the written record of the region. The topical element is part of the system, but it is the last layer, not the first. This matters because the modern beauty industry, and we are going to name this precisely in a moment, was built on the premise that your skin is a surface problem requiring a surface solution. Creams, serums, peels, retinol at escalating concentrations. The logic is structurally identical to treating thirst by rubbing water on your arm. It addresses the symptom at the wrong location, and it does so deliberately, because a problem that is never actually solved is a customer who comes back. Here is the number that changes everything. The United States Food and Drug Administration did not substantially update its cosmetics regulatory framework between 1938 and 2022. 84 years. The law governing what could be put in your moisturizer and sold without independent safety testing was written the year Lou Gehrig gave his farewell speech. While that law sat unchanged, the industry reorganized itself. In 1976, the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel was established, funded not by the government, but by the Personal Care Products Council, which is the trade association for the cosmetics industry itself. The panel reviewing ingredient safety was being paid for by the companies whose ingredients it was reviewing. By the time any meaningful federal update arrived, that panel had reviewed over 4,000 ingredients and had no legal authority to remove a single one from the market. 4,000 reviews. Zero enforcement power. That is not a regulatory system. It is a performance of one. A retired school teacher in Nagano, 68 years old, with 2 adult daughters and 40 years of a practice she learned from her mother-in-law, once said something that took a moment to land. She said the women in her village have never had a word for anti-aging, because the concept assumes deterioration as the baseline. She uses a fermented rice bran paste on her skin every other evening. She spends about $3 a month on it. Her mother did the same. Her mother's mother did the same, back when the Edo period tradition of Nuka fermented rice bran used in bathing and skincare was not a trend, but simply Tuesday. Nuka has been documented in Japanese domestic practice since the 17th century. It was not discovered by a laboratory in the last decade. It was simply never abandoned by the women who knew it worked. This is the difference between invention and preservation. The West wants to claim discovery. These women never lost the thing in the first place. Let's get more specific about what the real practice looks like and why it works at the level of skin biology in ways that expensive synthetic formulas are still trying to approximate. Fermented ingredients: rice bran, koji, miso, sake lees contain compounds produced by the fermentation process that have a smaller molecular profile than their unfermented counterpart. Smaller molecules penetrate the outer skin barrier more effectively. This is not folk logic. This is basic chemistry, and it is why cosmetic companies have spent the last 2 decades trying to synthesize fermentation byproducts in controlled environments while charging you $90 for the result. The women in Kyoto's traditional districts who have worked with sake for generations have been rinsing their hands in sake lees, the solid residue left after sake filtration, for as long as the sake itself has existed. The observation that these women's hands age differently from other women's hands is not modern. It was noted in Japanese domestic literature centuries before anyone had a word for ceramides. Synthetic retinol, for comparison, was not introduced into mainstream cosmetics until 1971. It is held up as the gold standard of anti-aging dermatology. It is younger than the Beatles breakup. Fermented rice bran has been in continuous daily use in Japan since before the American Revolution. The question of which one has the longer track record is not a close call. Now, thermal practice. The onsen, Japan's volcanic hot spring bathing tradition, is not a wellness trend. It is an infrastructure. Rural communities in Nagano were built around it the way other towns were built around rivers. The water in these springs carries dissolved minerals, silica, sulfur, sodium bicarbonate that interact with the skin's surface in ways that no bath product currently sold in America can replicate, because no bath product sold in America contains water that has been filtering through volcanic rock for thousands of years. The mineral composition varies by region. The practice of daily or near daily immersion over a lifetime creates an accumulation that is not visible in any single bath and not reducible to any ingredient list. What is consistent across communities, Okinawa, Kyoto, Nagano, is that the skin is never treated as a problem. It is treated as a reflection. When a woman in Okinawa drinks her miso broth in the morning, she is not thinking about her skin. But the glutamate compounds, the fermentation-produced micronutrients, the sodium profile, these all interact systemically with the processes that manifest in skin texture and tone. The separation between nutrition and skincare is a Western commercial invention. It was created to allow 2 separate industries to sell you 2 separate products for one problem they would both prefer to remain unsolved. The synthetic fragrance question belongs here too. The word fragrance on an American cosmetics label is a single word that can legally conceal hundreds of individual chemical compounds that the manufacturer is not required to disclose. The European Union prohibited this particular standard in 2003. The United States has retained it, not because the science supports it, but because changing it would require every major fragrance formulation in the American market to be retooled at significant expense to the companies that profit from it. The women in these Japanese communities do not use fragrance in their skincare, not because they are minimalists in the modern sense, because there was never a tradition of adding it, and therefore never a moment when removing it required a decision. This brings us to what other civilizations found independently. The Romans understood thermal bathing as a maintenance system, not a luxury. Their public bath culture was built on mineral immersion as standard hygiene. In ancient Egypt, fermented oils and grain-based preparations were documented as skin treatments by the 2nd millennium before the Common Era. Ayurvedic medicine in India has used fermented preparations, particularly those derived from rice and sesame, in daily skin and hair care for more than 2,000 years. Korean Hanji papermakers observed centuries ago that their hands retained an unusual quality of skin compared to other craftswomen, and traced it to the mineral content of the water and the plant-based compounds in the paper pulp they worked with daily. Japanese women did not discover any of this. They preserved it. That distinction, preserved, not invented, is what makes these practices credible in a way that a new launch from any brand never can be. A launch has a marketing budget. A practice that survived 20 generations has something harder to fabricate: a record. The reason you have not been told any of this clearly is not mysterious. The domestic American beauty industry is large. Its distribution chains, its lobbying presence, its relationship with the regulatory bodies that were supposed to constrain it, all of this creates a system with a strong incentive to position every older, simpler, effective practice as either dangerously unscientific or else reformulate it into something patentable and sell it back to you at a 3,900% markup. Rice bran is inexpensive fermented rice bran extract in a proprietary delivery system. Clinically tested by a lab the company also funded, in packaging that suggests Japanese heritage without requiring any connection to it, is not inexpensive. The ingredient is the same. The story around it is what you are actually buying. Women over 60 are the most experienced consumers in the American market. They have watched the same promises cycle through packaging redesigns for decades. The collagen cream that did not work in 1989 came back as a peptide serum in 2009 and will return again as something else in 2029. The mechanism changes, the ineffectiveness is consistent. This channel is not for women who still believe the next launch will be the one. It is for women who have moved past that and want to understand what was actually working somewhere else for a very long time. If you have a memory of a grandmother or a great aunt, a woman who lived simply and whose skin told a different story than her age, you already understand intuitively what this channel is about. Those women were not lucky. They were consistent. And consistency with real things over time produces results that no serum applied twice a day for 8 weeks can touch. What do you remember about how the older women in your family or your community cared for their skin, and how different was it from what the magazines were telling everyone else to do? Leave that in the comments. It matters more than you might think, because those memories are often the closest most of us in this country ever got to the thing we are talking about. And if there is a woman in your life, a mother, an aunt, a neighbor, who always seemed untouched by the years in a way that never made sense, what did she use? What did she eat? Where did she come from? Those answers are not sentimental. They are data. If you are the kind of woman who believes real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. The next video on this channel goes into one specific practice documented in a single mountain community in Nagano that 3 separate cosmetics companies have attempted to patent versions of in the last 15 years. All 3 patents were filed after researchers visited the community. None of the women who have used the practice for generations received a single dollar. The company that came closest to commercializing it raised $40 million in its Series B round in 2019. The practice itself cost nothing. That story deserves its own space.